All right, good morning, Doug. So much going on in the world today. Everything's overshadowed by this Ukraine stuff happening, but um, it's hard to know really what's actually happening in the world and where we should even focus this conversation. So let's just start with what are the things at the top of your mind this morning about everything that's happening in the world today?
Well, it's a question of what we know and what we think we know, and unknown unknowns, unknown knowns. I mean, this is and what news organizations choose to report to us. Although most of them are so incompetent that entirely apart from the fact that you can't believe anything that they say anymore, uh, they don't really have anybody with boots on the ground that's capable of interpreting what's happening, even if he was going to be honest. So it's very hard to know what's going on. Um, but we've gotten an invitation, you'll recall, to visit Donbass, the uh, the separatist areas of the Ukraine, in June, where some friends of ours are going to fly there in their jet, and I'd like to go if it's possible. It may
Yeah,
not
it'd be
be,
very yes, it'd be very interesting to see.
but that's June, so we won't have any boots on the ground information from that point of view for at least 2 months. But I'll make a bet. I'll make a bet as to what's going to happen in Russia. I'm not sure. Well, you tell me if you think you've been right so far, or I've been right or wrong so far. My guess, which I've said before, was that the Russians were simply going to evict the Ukrainian army from these two largely Russian provinces, where about, they say, 15,000 people have been killed and 25,000 people wounded. Those are the numbers that are bandied about. So my guess has always been that the great white devil Putin was going to evict them from those two provinces, make them officially recognized, which they already are, as new countries, and go back home to the status quo ante. That's the way I see it sorting out, and quickly, too. So, and what did you say? What was your assessment?
Well, my original assessment was just that there was definitely going to be a large scale military invasion of Ukraine. That seemed like that was clear. The ultimate goals of it, I thought, were broader than what you thought. I thought it was to actually replace the pro West, uh, uh, government there that was essentially put in place after a coup that was sponsored by the U.S. in 2014, and I thought just to demilitarize them, essentially to defang them from being able to attack Russia or to just agitate on Russia's border, and put some other government in place. That's what I thought that they would do. But then I also thought they would step back because they don't want to. They clearly don't want to. They don't want to run any place like that. It's just a huge liability, as you said many times. But also, it seems to me that they also are going through great pains not to inflict great damage on the infrastructure in Ukraine or to Ukrainian citizens. So it's like why would they, if they planned on trying to dominate it and conquer it, if they wanted to like totally obliterate what was there, then they would be doing that. But instead, what they're doing is they're behaving much more like they want to change things, change the dynamics there, the geopolitical dynamics, and then probably, like you say, step back. That's what it seems to me.
Oh, I agree with your assessment. And as far as we can get any news that makes any sense, it appears that they've only struck at military targets. Whereas if the Americans had gone in with shock and awe, they would have destroyed all of the infrastructure, the utilities, the electrical grid, this
Day
everything,
one, day
just
one,
absolutely wiped it out.
on day
Yeah,
one.
but that hasn't happened. They've just taken out the Ukrainian military, destroyed the air force, and at this point, I only wonder if, and I don't think that Russian soldiers will even try to capture uh, Kiev and the other cities, because it's one thing to try to fight an army on the open plains, but it's something else if you've got people in buildings trying to fight a guerrilla war. So that's the way I'd play it if I was Putin.
The thing is
Oh,
that there's been some strange things about it that don't make sense to me from a military strategy perspective. Like, I get why you don't want to agitate the population by not taking out the electrical grid, okay, or the water system. I get that, but like the fact that he's left communication systems in place is very strange. Like, it puts him at a huge tactical disadvantage by keeping it so that, there's I mean, he could make it so that there would be zero ability for anyone in Ukraine to communicate with anyone they can't see, if he wanted to. Like, it's definitely within their ability to do that with between actually kinetic, taking out specific targets, and then also through electronic warfare. Like, it could definitely be done, but he's not doing any of it, and that's very strange to me. I don't see why that doesn't hurt the civilians, but it also, and it gives him a huge disadvantage to not do it. I asked John Robb about it, and John Robb says it will be looked at as a huge miscalculation on his part later. That's what John Robb said about it.
well, of course, the ideal way to conduct regime change is simply to take out the people at the top. And this is one thing that's always mystified me, is that, World War II was fought, and there are apparently no serious attempts during the war to take out Hitler and his coterie directly. I mean, that's rather strange, and doesn't seem like there were any direct attempts to take out the Churchillians in London, or the Rooseveltians in Washington, or Stalin in Russia. It's almost like, well, it is like in many ways that we're living in medieval times, where these guys let the armies do the fighting, and the state structure itself is sacrosanct. I mean, it is rather strange. You really should just cut the head off the snake and dispense with all the expensive and bloody fighting with the pawns, the peons out in the field.
Yeah, it is. It is. But the other thing I think it's worth talking about, at least with what's happened, I find very strange with there's a lot of escalation happening with what's happening with Ukraine, which seems strange. I mean, there was certainly in the very beginning, Biden signaled that, they weren't going to do anything at all. I mean, I remember he had a big speech saying, basically if Putin went in, if it was not a major invasion, then, it why not be such a problem? But he actually specifically said, depending upon the size of the invasion, would depend on, what the reaction would be. And then at first they come out with these, sanctions that are pretty toothless, and then they really have escalated things dramatically. There's an agreement. They kicked them out of the SWIFT system. They have frozen their central bank reserves that are, the foreign currencies that are basically on hand in New York. Mostly, it's like 2/3 of all the reserves of the Russian bank are now frozen. And so and it's like, and then they, and then he responds by saying, we're moving our nuclear, alert status up a notch. And then there's, all the Americans come out going, he's escalating, he's making it provocative, he's trying to make it, he's making it much harder for us to work together. But after they stole 2/3 of the Russian central bank's money, it's like there's huge escalation. And then all these different states sending weapon systems into Ukraine, including Sweden, which doesn't have a track record of doing that sort of thing. And then now they're going to send fighters, European fighters, and they're almost certainly going to have to be flown by European pilots because the Ukrainians don't know how to fly these jets. So it's a huge, strange miscalculation on someone's part, I think.
Well, it really is, because it seems to me that Putin's intent was to demilitarize, he also said denazify the Ukraine. But it looks like the Americans with their pals in NATO are, they're ramping this up. And, this is something else that occurred to me, is the three Baltic states, Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia. Apparently nothing's going on there at all, but a lot of people in the US are saying, well, he's going to take them out too, like they're tremendous prizes that you want to have. But so far, I haven't heard a thing about anything there.
Nothing.
I'd say the chances of this invading those three countries are close to zero, frankly, because there's nothing to be gained by it whatsoever, except more troubles.
Well, then that would trigger, right? Because those are actual NATO members, right? So that would actual trigger.
Yes,
Yeah.
that would trigger something. So what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next?
Well, Doug, there's a couple of things I want to tell you that I've seen. That I know you're not in like social media, so you don't see these things. But so on Twitter, what you see now, and you know, if you ask John Robb will tell you that basically, you know, the big tech tools of censorship have gotten very good. So, you know, there's information. The information you see is almost certainly the information that they're okay with you seeing. You know, and it used to be a really good way to get like, you know, information about what was happening in different places, but it really isn't that way anymore. And it has been filled with nothing but pro-Ukrainian propaganda. I mean, including like stories that were of fake heroism. Like they had this supposed fighter, you know, jet fighter pilot who, you know, they called the ghost of Kiev, who shot down 6 Russian fighters over Kiev in one day, you know, giving him A status. Total fraudulent story, completely fraudulent. You know, have these guys on this island that told, you know, the Russians to go fuck themselves. And then the Russians blew them up. No, they actually all surrendered. They're all actually prisoners of war right now. You know, but they doing all these, you know, the guy who went and, you know, sacrificed himself to blow a bridge, you know, so that it's all fraud. The propaganda is strong. And there's no Russian propaganda.
You can't believe anything that you get out of there, whether it's Russian propaganda that filters through the West or Western propaganda, which is, of course, the first thing that we're exposed to. Just can't believe anything. I thought it was quite good that one of your employees who is in the Ukraine for the royalty exchange wrote a nice essay, which was published on internationalman.com, talking about what she's actually seeing and hearing in the streets. I thought that was quite elucidating, and people ought to go there and read that.
Yeah, and I posted that, shared that with some other people, and of course there are some people saying that what her post or her essay on this was Russian propaganda. That's this Ukrainian woman, this Ukrainian mother, who lives in Ukraine, and they said it was Russian propaganda, and she doesn't even make any assertions about who she said. She says it's a bad situation, and she just shares information that she's heard and seen, and that's it. There's literally no judgment on her part about any of it, except for it's a mess. And
that's right. Anything that is not radically anti-Russia and anti-Putin is automatically labeled as Russian propaganda.
Exactly. And so what I'm seeing, Doug, is like the same sort of like consensus building activities that occurred with COVID and with the vaccines, you know, where there was only one choice. It was like, you know, you must be vaccinated. No consideration for whether or not, you know, there is natural immunity or any of that, but just like it was you were a good person, you were doing the right thing if you were doing it. And if you were against it, you were evil and you're a real problem. You're a real problem. That same sort of lack of nuance, you know, you're either with us or against us, is exactly what you see online right now relating to Ukraine. I mean, this one guy, for instance, says, if you support Putin, you support tyranny and kleptocracy, it's indefensible. You know, like that kind of attitude is what you hear everywhere.
It's absolutely insane. And I think, as I pointed out the last time, I'll say something that's actually going to be beyond the pale. It's that has Vladimir Putin been good or bad for Russia? And of course, let me start off by saying, once again, I don't believe in the nation state as a way of organizing things. And I don't support the leaders of any countries in the world today. They're all basically, well, they're all sociopaths, and many of them are actual psychos. But if you actually look at what Putin's done after the Soviet Union broke up in, let's say, 1990 and thereabouts, there could have been wars between all of these countries, all of the old Soviet socialist republics, all of which have artificial borders. There could have been civil wars and big secession movements within those countries, lots more wars. That didn't happen. But instead, what he did, although lots of people stole lots of money, well, that happens everywhere where politics is involved. Russia has functioning stock markets. Most of their industry, almost all their industry, has been privatized and publicly traded and being run. The income tax was cut down to 10%. So, and he made active overtures to integrate Russia into the Western world, but it was turned down. So I'm not a great one for conspiracies in general, but if I was a Martian looking at the situation, I'd say, what's going on here? And the Russians, having gone from, organization to Russia now, the way it is, and it still needs to be broken up further, frankly, because it's got all kinds of nationalities and such that should be independent countries. But still, I'd say, what's going on here? This is insane the way this person's being demonized. Do I approve of the invasion of the Ukraine? Well, so he said no, but we've got to try to look at both sides of this issue.
Right. You don't have to be a Putin supporter to not be forced. Like, well, the people are trying to force you to have childlike decisions and childlike thinking about these problems that we face, where it's it's either with us or against us. There can't be anything like, well, no, I'm not actually. I think fuck all these people. I want no part of it. It's all I have nothing to do with it. I'm not going to give them my opinion. I'm not going to support one side or the other. These people are a disaster all around. So yeah. I don't know, but so to me, I think here's the thing. So here, let me talk about what I think conspiracy. I know you don't like conspiracies that much, but here. So if phase one of the Great Reset was about the fundamental change, was it started to regulate the flow of people, where the free our expectations were reset as a society, and certainly systems were put in place to better manage the flow of people from one jurisdiction to another, one store or another, all these things. And that systems are all still in place, even though they're pulling the COVID restrictions. The health pass the technology has been adopted more broadly, even while this is happening. Okay, so it can be used, turned on for any reason again in the future. So that was phase one. And phase two seems to be about controlling the flow of money. Because if you look at you see this economic warfare that took place, the salvo against anyone who dared just to give $25 to a Canadian trucker. We see the DHS coming out with this, if you're mis, dis, and malinformation, makes you basically a terrorist, which means they can do anything they want to you. Of course, your finances are the first to go. And then you see this all-out economic warfare now on a state level toward Russia, where they actually steal 2/3 of their wealth. I mean, it's so amazing. You used to have to go in and fight, into a country and raid the treasury of the country. You'd have to it cost you something, but no, they just tap a few keys on the keyboard and they've taken 2/3 of their wealth. And so you see that, and then they see them demanding that anyone who's doing business with any Russians, freeze their accounts. Like if you have a cryptocurrency exchange, you have Russian clients, they say freeze their accounts. And so you see this they're just amping this up in a much bigger way, blocking them out of the SWIFT system and all of this, I think, and think about what they can do now, because when they say we have to roll out new regulations on cryptocurrency, why? Because this is how Russia is using it for nefarious activities. They're going to use crypto.
Right. Well, people do act in packs and herds, and if nobody, and they all tend to believe the same things together. And I was just thinking about this the other day with fashions, where I've noticed that nobody wears a tie anymore, even with a suit. Okay, well, fashion's changing. But if you remember how ties were fat, and then they were
skinny,
thin, yeah, and then medium size, and then they started going away. Of course, the same thing happens with women's fashions, even more so. Short mini skirts, long maxi skirts, and everybody does it. One person starts doing it, it's a fashion, and if you don't follow along with the fashion, you're looked at being outre. And it's the same thing in thinking. It's exactly the same thing, where it's accepted now. Oh, everybody seems to be thinking Russia's the devil, etc. Well, everybody has to think that way, or it's like wearing a mini skirt to a formal ball, that type of thing.
Right.
So it's the same thing, and it's quite embarrassing. It's one of the many things that makes me rather ashamed to be a human, quite frankly, because they're just so stupid.
Seems
But
so. Creatures of mimicry for sure.
it does. But the next thing, following up on what you're saying about currencies, I think you're quite correct, is it'll be central bank currencies. And who is that woman? Her name was Sala Amarova. That's exactly what she was proposing when she was up for being comptroller of the currency. She wanted to have everybody have an account with the Federal Reserve itself. That's where your bank account would be. Now, of course, commercial banks that still exist, making loans and things like this, but everybody's major account would be with the Fed itself. So
That's coming. That's coming, I think. It's just a matter of time.
yeah, yeah, it is.
So anyway, I'm just very skeptical about any time that I see basically the powers that be essentially presenting me with a one of two options, and they're for or against. You know,
Yeah.
it's like anytime that happens, I feel like I'm subject to some sort of propaganda that's trying to shape the way I think about the world.
And the media is totally glued to the government. That everything the government says is parroted by the media these days.
Yeah, and there's also, I think, something in humans though, that make us excited about these simplistic tribal-like arguments. You know, where we get it, where we're lathered into a frenzy to support the good side versus the bad side. You know, there's something about us that makes it so we're so easily played, into that kind of thinking. Don't you think? I mean, it's like, because it's not, the
Oh yeah,
media is bad, but like people are interested in it. Like that's the problem, is that people are now, everyone's the expert on Ukraine. Everyone's tired of Putin's bad behavior. You know.
that's absolutely right. It's shocking and disgusting. Well, what am I doing about it personally? Not much. There's nothing I can do about it personally, but uh, I'm going to open up an account. I've decided with a Russian fund manager who lives in Panama and London, who's for many years been buying Russian and Ukrainian bonds, generally with 2-year maturities, with so it's not like a long-term risk, but the yield to maturity on these bonds, none of which have defaulted, have been in the 20% per year area. So that's pretty good, as well as Russian companies, which often have dividend yields, especially now since the Russian stock markets have collapsed something like 30–40% just in the last few days. How many of these things are yielding 10–15% or more? So I'm going to do that. I think it's a very worthwhile speculation. People talk about being contrarian and buying when blood is running in the streets, and I recognize that if this gets totally out of control, well, anything can happen, and all these companies will be reorganized and subsumed or stolen by Western. Who knows? But I'm willing to just to see what my well-connected Russian friend is buying and selling. I'm going to put $100,000 in this fund with them, and I think it might do well. So that's one thing that I'm doing. Another thing is I think that we're genuinely in a bear market as far as U.S. stocks are concerned. There's every reason to believe that they're headed south a lot at this point. So I'm going to continue selling naked calls against the S&P, which is what I've basically been doing, and individual stocks like Moderna, which has worked out extremely well. So I'm going to continue with that plan, because if there's any justice in the world, which there's not, but there's probably enough that Moderna is going to go to zero anyway.
Yeah.
And I'm collecting, premiums of 100–200% per year on that. And the other thing is in the futures market, which most people should not play with for all kinds of reasons that we could talk about, but they're irrelevant to talk about them now. is that grain prices, because of Ukraine and Russia, because they're major exporters of wheat and corn, both, among other things, agricultural things, they're very high at this point. Now, the last time agricultural products got into this range, that's when all the Arabs in North Africa, who actually live on cheap grains like that, rioted, and then you had all these revolutions. So, this thing isn't just going to take place in Eastern Europe. It could spill over to other parts of the world that are reliant upon that grain for people, not just for cows.
Do you think those commodities prices go up from here still, or do you think that is the fear priced in at this point?
Well, as a trader, I only really like to take positions when they look really cheap, really expensive, and a new trend has started where I can see. But now, yeah, they're expensive, but farmers are making money. But then again, the price of all of the main fertilizers, potassium, phosphorus, and ammonia, and combinations thereof with some other things like sulfur, they've all tripled in the last year. So farmers' costs have gone up a lot. And the cost of oil has gone up a lot. And the breakage of supply chains and so forth like that has cost farmers money. So my guess at this point is that although the grains have hit I think they've hit kind of a new plateau where they'll normalize, but it's much higher than it was only a year or two ago. I mean, it used to be, you'd think, well, yeah, $8 are kind of like what soybeans cost, and $5 kind of like is what wheat costs, and $4 is kind of like what corn costs. I think at this point we can double all of those, and they'll fluctuate around that new equilibrium, which is not good for poor people.
No, when I see headlines like I saw something the other day that said that estimated that in Paraguay, for instance, that they were going to lose as much as 60% of their soybean crop this year because of droughts that we've had here in South America, and they're like the number 4 exporter of soybeans in the world. Like I assume that must already be priced in at this point, right? I mean, that kind of massive crop failure, right? Must be priced in.
Yeah, that's already priced in because I get all kinds of reports that tell me, frankly, I don't pay much attention to this stuff. This is for real specialists that are on the floor and scalping a penny or two here. Whether it's raining in Western Paraguay, I don't care about that. That's not the way I take positions. But the commodity markets really tell you everything. Everything that's known is in the commodity markets, frankly. And right now, so gold is 1910, and silver's kind of an equilibrium in the 23. The people that really watch about Putin going out to conquer Western Europe or even conquering Ukraine, I think what Putin wants to do is quite intelligent, which is to make Ukraine a buffer zone, like Finland, demilitarize it. Shouldn't be the bitch of the West.
Right.
And he doesn't want it to, it's too expensive for it to be his bitch. Just, I think despite the fact it was stupid of Putin, I think, to invade the way he has, everything considered, he's basically the good guy in this. So, shouldn't say that. That's quoted. And if somebody hates me, they can romance that into.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, the thing is that very few people seem to understand the recent history of Ukraine, to see what's happened there, in the last, even in the last decade, that would make you think that you can understand from Putin's perspective why he would actually feel legitimately threatened by the moves that are being made there.
That's right, because the U.S. overthrew the popularly elected government of Ukraine in 2014. And since then, they tried to turn it into a Western puppet.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
if the Russians did that to the government of Canada, I don't know how that nitwit Trudeau would fit into this.
He'd stay, I think.
Well, you think Washington would be quite unhappy, but that's what the Americans did in 2014.
Right. And I think people also don't understand, this came up when I was having dinner at your place the other day, is they understand the importance of buffer states between major nations. And it's basically Uruguay, for instance, this is what I learned over dinner, was essentially a buffer state between Argentina and Brazil, because these two major countries that had problems, and in the best way to make sure that they did not feel threatened by each other is the existence of a buffer state that was essentially neutral in all of that. And it just relaxes them. But when you have an enemy who's right on your door all the time, you become constantly suspicious of everything that's happening there. And that's essentially what as the pro-West, pro-NATO government has sort of been in charge in Ukraine, and has been taking weapons basically for the last 4 years, been getting defensive weapons like Javelin missile systems, which are very effective against tanks, and drones, which are also very effective against tanks. So they've been getting those things from the West, and right on Putin's doorstep. You can understand why it would actually legitimately increase his anxiety about what is planned.
Yeah, shipping weapons wholesale to a country, it's like they're trying to foment a war, or foment a guerrilla war where lots of people's lives are destructive and innocent people are killed. I mean, it's absolutely insane. And this is the West's doing at this point.
Right. What's interesting is that the line people have for when you've now crossed it, in terms of whether, like who's the bad guy and who's the good guy, because we can do things like, we think that the U.S. believes that economic sanctions are perfectly legitimate and can be used without any reservations at all, because we do it all the time to anybody who goes the wrong direction in our mind. And then we also train the militaries. We give them weapon systems. And we're like, none of those things are supposedly an act of war. The only thing that's an act of war is when I cross some hypothetical line in the sand. Physically in the real world, I drive a truck across it, now all of a sudden this is an act of war. So I mean, it's just think of it's poorly defined. When it's an act of aggression, clearly to be arming somebody who is antagonistic toward you.
Could be the next thing that we're going to be talking about, where the news cycle is going to be focused on, to the total exclusion of everything else. Like even in this news cycle, didn't we just find that in Brisbane, Australia, there have been 18,000 houses, that's a lot, that have been inundated, severely damaged? Do you hear anything about that? No.
Nope.
It's an important news thing.
Yes.
It's all about, well, look, Ukraine. It's long been said that war is nature's way of teaching Americans geography. So now everybody's going to have a lot of superficial knowledge about Ukraine, which they're going to forget when things are redirected to China.
Right.
And God knows what's going to happen with Taiwan.
Yeah, it's amazing. That's good. I think.
It's like Gilda Radner said when she was Rosanna. It's one damn thing after another. It's always something.
It's always something.
Yeah.
Yes.
And of course, we still have COVID 2.0 with probably, you'll have to be chipped because it's too easy to fake the various paper and cell phone IDs. You'll have to be chipped. That's going to be the next thing. And what's the next thing after that?
Well, I mean, the obvious thing is that you can blame all these economic problems, all the inflation. It's because it's Putin. I mean, clearly, like prices are up because we have to. He's cutting off the gas, or we don't have access to gas. Food, because they're big exporters. It's not that we've been messing around with the currency.
Is it? isn't there some way that we can blame all the young athletes, soccer players and basketball players that are dying of heart problems on the court? Isn't that Putin's
Well, I think
fault
that
too somehow?
I
Or is
think
that the climate?
that, well, that's climate, but I think that can go back to Putin because he is the one of the largest export producers of fossil fuels, which clearly is destroying the environment. So that's what's taking out the soccer players. So yeah, I think ultimately it's Putin.
That's very logical. That's very, it is. Well,
Yeah,
further
he's
to the
definitely
proof.
he's the boogeyman. He's a good boogeyman. I mean, you got to have a
Well,
boogeyman to move
actually, I
forward.
saw somebody blog in a kind of a major blog the other day that he said, I shouldn't say something like this, but maybe we should have regime change by sending Mossad in to kill Putin in an assassination attempt. Well, okay, if you want to have regime change, that's the correct and proper, low-cost, effective way to doing it. So why can't they be saying, let's ramp up the nuclear missiles and actually have a war against Russia, but you can't kill its leader, which I don't want to do, incidentally. But well, I kind of talked about this in the novel Assassin, and we're going to talk about this type of regime change more in the novel Terrorist, which will probably ensure that I'm never going to be able to leave the territorial boundaries of Uruguay after that book is published.
You're gonna have some shitty social credit score, Doug. That's for sure.
Well, that is the next thing that's coming to the U.S. Maybe not by that name exactly, but yeah, we'll have that for sure.
Yeah,
no,
that's coming. Yeah, it might be our ESG score, something like that, as we talked about before. All right. Well, unless you have anything else to add, Doug, I think we can leave it here for today and see what happens between now and Wednesday when we get together again.
Oh, it'll be exciting. It'll be a cliffhanger.
It will. All right. Thank you very much.
Okay, great, Matt.